Hi guys, so I was recently asked how to knit a cat-eared hat and I thought that sounded like such a fun project I decided to show you how. So if you're interested in finding out, just keep on watching. For this project I'm going to use 2 skeins of Yarn Bee's Fleece Light in Sandstone, and I'm also going to be using some wooden needles today. These are size 10 from Clover. As with any project, the first step is to cast on. So I'm first making an X across my palm and then slipping that off in a pretzel shape, then taking the inside right loop and pulling tight. This creates a slip knot, which is our first cast on stitch. We're going to add a few more by wrapping the tail of the yarn around your thumb, putting the needle in between that loop, wrapping your working yarn around, and then pulling that other loop around. So it's easier to see than explain, but that's basically how you do it. So I'm going to do this until there are 64 stitches on my needle. Once all the stitches have been cast on, I'm going to start working in K2P2 ribbing. So to do that, I'm going to knit 2 by inserting my right hand needle from front to back into the first stitch on the left hand needle, bringing my working yarn around that needle and then pulling the one from the left off. Then I'm going to bring my working yarn around through the middle and then insert that right hand needle from back to front this time, and then doing essentially the same thing as if I were to knit, bringing the yarn around and then pulling that other loop off. The big thing to remember here is just to bring that working yarn around whenever you switch between knitting and purling, otherwise you're going to get a lot more stitches than you'd bargained for. I'm going to continue this knit 2 purl 2 ribbing method for about 5 inches just to create a really nice brim of the hat so that it doesn't slip off your head. As you can see, I now have 5 inches of ribbing, and so it's time to move on to the main portion of the hat. The first thing I'm going to do is knit both the front and back of the first stitch, which you can see me doing here. I'm essentially just knitting the front half and then the back half of the same stitch. This creates an extra stitch, so instead of having 64, we're now working on 65 stitches. I'm going to knit to the end of this row, and then I'm going to begin working in stockinette stitch, beginning with a purl row. If you don't know, stockinette stitch is just alternating between a purl row and a knit row, and so I'm going to do that for 17 rows, ending on a purl row. It's now time to start shaping the top of the hat, or the crown, and so the first thing I'm going to do is knit the first 2 stitches together, and then I'm going to knit 13 stitches. The next thing I'm going to do is actually slip 1 K2 together and pass the slipped stitch over, which I'll show you in just a moment. And I will also take the time to mention that I do have the written instructions on my blog, which I will link below. So if you have any questions about that, definitely go check that out. So here we're coming up on the decrease, so I'm going to slip this stitch, and then I'm going to K2 the next 2, or knit them together. And you can see I'm just going front to back on both of those stitches. Then I'm going to go back to that stitch that we slipped, which was the second one in on the right hand needle, and pull that right off into the middle. That decreases 2 stitches, and then I'm going to repeat the entire thing over again. So I'm going to knit 13, slip the next stitch, knit the second 2 together, and then pass that slipped stitch over 3 times, and then I'm going to knit 13 again and knit the last 2 together. Once I'm done with this row, I'm going to purl the next row, and then I'll go and repeat the decreasing row. However, since we did decrease twice on each little section there, rather than knitting 13 between my decreases, I'm going to knit 11. Then I'll do another purl row, and then the next one I'll knit 9 between my decreases. And this is where I would recommend checking out the written instructions. Sometimes those are easier to follow. I'm going to continue decreasing in this manner until there's only 1 stitch between my decreases, which means I'll have 9 total stitches on my needle. Then I'll grab the tail of the yarn and snip that off, slip it onto a yarn needle, and then thread that through the remaining stitches. This just gathers all of the rest of the stitches together and creates a nice little cap to the hat. Then I'm going to seam this up, and that is it for the actual hat itself, and it's time to move on to the ears. The ears are actually pretty easy to make up, but I am going to add a little bit of pizzazz by working both an outer and inner ear just to give it a little dimension and a little more interest. So I'm starting with the outer ear by casting on 3 stitches the exact same way I have before, knitting the front and back of the first stitch. Then I'm going to knit the next stitch and knit the front and back of that last stitch. So now we have 5 stitches on our needle instead of 3, and I'm going to purl 1 row, then repeat that increasing row again until I have 17 stitches. So essentially I'm just knitting the front and back of the first and last stitches. And then I'm just going to cast this off and make 1 more so that I have 2 outer ears. And then to make the inner ears, I'm going to work those the exact same way, except instead of finishing at 17 stitches, I'm only going to go to 11. Once both the outer ear and inner ear are completed, I'm going to put them right on top of each other, right sides together, and just seam these together. I am going to try and line these up as best I can, so there is a little bit of finagling, but it does give dimension to the ear. Then I'm going to turn the ears around so that the right side is facing outward, and all that's left to do is seam these to the outside of the hat, and you're finished. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. And remember, I do put out videos Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so any recommendations are more than welcome, and I'll see you later. Bye!